The three that stick out for me personally was ayahuasca, therapy, and meditation. I think ayahuasca for me, was a very profound experience, and that opened my eyes to all things spiritual. Meditation I see as a bit of a maintenance activity. If you meditate every day, life is just easier. And I think I would recommend, I think everyone should try therapy. And I'm glad that many people are talking more openly about therapy, and particularly men, because I don't think, anyone who grew up in the 90s probably wasn't given the space or the encouragement to really discuss their emotions or deal with things that they might need to process in different ways. Yeah, those have been my top three. I think that have been most useful for me.
Hi, Envisionairs. Welcome to the EnvisionAir Podcast. This is the podcast where we envision living our best lives, ones filled with unlimited possibilities, by exploring everyday topics related to health, wealth, community, and love. This podcast is for information purposes only and should not be considered to be medical, legal, tax, financial, or other professional advice.
This podcast does not encourage or endorse any illegal activity.
We are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liability that may arise from the information in this podcast.
The views explored in the podcast may not always be those of the host.
On today's episode, we have a very special episode that I think is going to be very inspiring and enlightening. Joining us is Clarke Dodd, who is a high-flying management consultant with nearly a decade of experience working with over 24 organizations worldwide, including some of the world's top companies like HSBC, Goldman Sachs, and PwC. He's been helping them to meet their operational and performance deliverables, including saving them hundreds of thousands and sometimes millions of dollars in annual savings. Clarke has recently transitioned from the fast-paced world of management consultant into still management consultant, but freelancing. So he's going to be continuing to work with businesses to help them find solutions they need to advance their growth. His impressive career trajectory might lead one to assume his primary focus is all about financial forecasts, P&L statements, business strategies, and operations. However, there's much more to Clarke than simply business acumen. In recent years, Clarke has embarked on a profound spiritual journey, discovering deeper, more meaningful aspects of himself. And I'm so happy that he's going to be sharing with us his fascinating personal journey from the corporate world to a wider path of self-discovery and spirituality. So, a very warm welcome. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Clarke.
No, thank you very much. And thank you very much for that introduction, Nicole.
Pleasure. Well, I'd love to talk about your journey into spirituality. And I think a really good starting off point would be, what does spirituality mean to you? And how has that changed over the years?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think for me, I really still feel like a novice in all things spirituality. It's been a relatively recent journey over the last two to 3 years, because, throughout my life, up until maybe 30 years old, I'd never really been religious. And the idea of anything spiritual, I kind of saw as a little bit out there. So it was, for me, I think spirituality is an understanding or a belief in knowing things that are going on in the universe that we might not necessarily understand or yet be aware of.
And well, did you grow up? Because I think for me, when I was growing up, I was quite, I guess, more religious.
Yeah.
I always had a thread of spirituality, throughout my childhood, because my dad was much more spiritual and my mom was much more religious. And so I was very fortunate to have both, but I didn't really understand spirituality probably until my, I would say late 20s,
Yes.
And early 30s. And so did you grow up having that sort of more of the religious background, or was it more of an atheist sort of upbringing with not much, religion in the traditional sense?
Pretty much the latter. I think
Mm.
when I was a kid, obviously we were told about religion, particularly Christianity at the time. And in my head, I was like, oh, what? There's a big bearded man sitting in the clouds. I can't see that, so therefore it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
That was my mindset at the time.
Okay.
Yeah,
And so, was there a specific a moment in your life where you said 2 to 3 years ago
yeah.
something happened? And so, what was it that really kind of turned you a little bit more, maybe go inwards, or even
Mhm.
more outward
Yeah.
to find this element of spirituality?
Yeah, so it's pure coincidence in honesty. So it was probably about maybe 3.5 years ago. I was on a surfing trip with some friends, and I remember one guy in particular that we met who was absolutely evangelical about ayahuasca in particular. He said, "Oh yeah, I've been working in the corporate world for so many years. I've done ayahuasca; it's changed my life. I'm now a life coach. Everything's amazing." So really evangelical. I was like, okay, well, this sounds like something I'd be quite keen to try myself. So it was, I think, maybe March 2022. I had an amazing trip where I went to New York, Minnesota, and Memphis for work,
Okay.
and tagged on a couple of weeks in Colombia and 1 week in Peru.
Wow.
So during that week, did the Machu Picchu Trail. But before that, I actually walked around Cusco town center and looked at all the different shops. One of the shops was said it had all like different things about shamanism. So quite intrigued, I went in. I have something in my wallet that is the card that I got
Oh,
from that
cool.
shop, which I keep
Yeah.
with me as a reminder.
Wow.
Um, and then after I'd finished Machu Picchu, it was about 7 p.m. Went back to my hotel, called the number on the card, um, and then was invited to come along for an ayahuasca experience. So I got there at 10 p.m., knowing that I was flying at 10 a.m. the next day. Uh,
Wow.
so that was how it all started.
Okay. So let's go back to, because a lot of people would be walking around, they see
Mhm.
this like store, someone gives them a card and they're like, thank you so much. They like
Yeah.
toss it, or they put it in their pocket and they forget about it. What was it when you go back to your hotel room that you were like, I'm going to actually call and like be like, hey, what's
Yeah.
going on? What was it?
So I think for me, it's ever since I met the guy during that surfing trip that was so evangelical about ayahuasca in particular.
Hmm.
It had been stuck in the back of my mind in terms of something that I felt drawn to or I wanted to experience for myself at some point. So it kind of felt like just the right moment that, oh my God, I'm now in a place where this can now happen. So as soon
Mm.
as I got back, I thought it's pretty much now or never. I thought, okay, this is maybe the right time and the right opportunity. But it was a little bit scary reflecting on the experience because I was picked up. I got told to bring, I think, $150. I was picked up by a guy who didn't speak English from the middle of the city, was just slowly driven further and further into the forest. Then lost my signal. I think I sent a voice note to a friend saying, by the way, if I don't make it, I love you. So yeah, but then when I got to this like beautiful retreat with dogs and animals around and the scenario was beautiful, I met the guy who was the person who gave me the card.
Okay.
So
Okay.
instantly I saw a familiar face, and he told me about what to expect. And yeah, I think it lasted overall for about 4 hours, finishing about 2 a.m.
Wow. Okay, we're gonna get definitely into like the ceremony because I'm so intrigued by this.
Mm.
I'm so intrigued by we've talked about this before. I am very intrigued by ayahuasca and well, let's just before we even get into the ceremony, what it is and your experience. Um, okay, so so when you met this gentleman, he offered you this or he talked about ayahuasca in the store. Is that was what it was?
Exactly.
Okay. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then was he a local person or was he international and just kind of living there?
So he was living there. He was originally, I think, part of the Sami or some kind of spiritual-esque tribe in, I think, northern Sweden or Norway.
Oh, okay.
So he had then gone all the way over to Peru and was a shaman, and he had an assistant with him as well that was a local to Peru.
Wow. And so, okay, would you say you're a risk taker naturally? Because the way you set that up, like that
Yeah.
whole experience,
Yeah.
it's like it's got like human trafficking written like
Yeah.
all over it. And like you're too far gone at that point. Like
Of
signal's
course.
gone, you're getting
Exactly.
deeper. You're like, all right,
Exactly.
but so
Yeah.
yeah, are you normally a risk taker? Do you think?
I think I'm quite a bit of an optimist.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm always someone who would rather experience something and have it go wrong than not
Mm,
have an experience overall.
yeah.
Luckily, touch wood, there has been nothing that bad that's ever happened to me if
Yeah.
I've
Yeah. Yeah.
been
Yeah.
like kidnapped or anything like that.
Right.
So, so I think it's maybe it's naivety and pure optimism that has led me to take a risk like that.
Yeah. But you know what's interesting about that? And I have this because I too am very quite optimistic, I think. And, I think I always have been my whole life. But I also, I don't know, I'm hopeful that with that, you tend to attract quite positive people too in your life. And
Mm.
therefore, hopefully you're not, you know, getting into situations where you're like, it's quite negative and
Yeah.
dark, I hope. So I
Yeah.
like to also think that, but touch wood. Yeah, no, that's interesting. Okay, so for those who don't know what ayahuasca is, can you tell us what ayahuasca is and what it was like?
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
for you.
Um, So I'm quite happy to admit, particularly when I was, 18, 19, I had tried a few different drugs that I probably shouldn't have because they were illegal at the time. However, I think ayahuasca is unfairly put into that category. But for me, it was quite a deep and profound spiritual experience rather than, taking a psychedelic high.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I was sat in this room on my own with the shaman that I've met and his assistants. Was given a blanket, lying on a yoga mat, and he had basically set up this tiny shrine in front of him, which had, I think, a puma skull and some feathers and all different kinds of different stuff. Um, he then poured me this drink that was probably no more than a couple of shots worth of this green liquid. And when I drank it, it kind of felt like an earthy smoothie.
Okay.
But as soon as I drank it, I could like feel it in my stomach, and I knew, okay, this is not normal food.
Mm.
And that's how the experience started. It is there are a lot of therapists who would promote the use of ayahuasca in healing or self-discovery or something like that. Because I don't know exactly how it works, but I think it can be quite useful for processing trauma, or people on the one end of the spiritual side will say that it's a way to connect with nature or with God or with the universe.
Wow. Okay. And so, okay, the actual substance itself, it's
Mhm.
plant-based, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And from what I've read and watched documentaries and so on. It seems like this has been an ancient medicine
Mm.
that has been used for thousands of years,
Exactly.
civilizations,
Yeah.
and it is it done regularly or is it more of a journey, like a passage? Um,
Interesting. I'm not entirely sure in terms of how it's used. I've met some people who have used it for dealing with a particular challenge.
hmm,
Mine was relatively
hmm.
spontaneous. But as far as I'm aware, it has been used in particularly, tribal scenarios for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Hmm. Hmm. And so when you ingested it,
Mm.
it took a little while how long did it take to actually take effect?
Yeah, so I think it must have been maybe 15 minutes. And the next thing I remember was being curled up in a fetal position on the yoga mat, um, completely overwhelmed and crying because of just the pure like magnificence of the colors that I was seeing. It was like a kaleidoscope of the most intricate and beautiful colors that I've ever seen in my life. So yeah, so in preparation for the experience, I was told that when you take ayahuasca, it is quite common for, you know, something to be released from the body, either from the front end or the back end, let's say. And for me, maybe it was, you know, tear based, because it's quite hard to explain. But I felt like there was an entity that was a part of myself, but in some way connected to myself, that was guiding me through the whole experience. So me crying, and I think before that, I don't think I'd cried for at least 5 years or so. I hadn't really been a big crier, you know, as a man, you're told to, you know, growing up in the 90s, told to not really express your emotions too much. But the entity that felt like a part of myself, but also external, was happy that I at least had some kind of release in some way. And probably for the first hour and a half, I was quite conscious of, I don't want to throw up and I don't want anything bad to happen in the other way, even though there's a toilet there and it, you know, could have been a bit messy and gross. It was through the kind of the guidance of whatever that entity was, or however it was created in my mind, that I grew to become comfortable with either of those scenarios happening. So for me, that was the biggest lesson of that journey, was don't spend all of your time and effort and mental space thinking about what might happen in the future. How can you be at peace with whatever will happen and have your energy focused on the full present moment and try and live in that moment as much as possible?
Absolutely. It sounded like you almost had this moment of surrendering, which a lot of people talk about, is this, it's like this huge, a lot of people experience spirituality or the full effect of it, I've heard, when they surrender. And so you hear a lot of these kind of, you know, I guess songs, you know, from during slavery as well. And, you know, lots of these very spiritual songs, if you will, talking about surrendering to God or the universe, whatever, however you want to call it. So you did have this kind of almost surrendering, if you will. And then what happened after that? Did you actually end up, you know, being sick, or no? You just
surprisingly not.
Oh wow, are you serious?
Yeah, so that was what I was scared of happening for the first, I don't know, hour and a half. But then once I was at peace with that potentially happening, it didn't actually happen.
Wow.
So I don't know why it happened to some people and maybe not others. And it's weird. It felt like the entity that was a guide was almost like happy and congratulating me on having made that realization. Such a like profound experience to feel like you're being guided throughout an experience like that.
So what now, in hindsight, or having looked back at it, what do you think that force was?
That is a very good question. Some people say it is a way that you're connecting with Mother Nature. So I know some people who've done multiple ayahuasca experience. So yeah, I met this guy on a flight from Bali to Bangkok earlier this year, and really interesting guy. He had done 12 ayahuasca experiences. I was like, wow, that's a lot. And whenever he referred to ayahuasca, he always referred to it as Mother Ayahuasca. So I think some people might see it as a way to speak to nature. Some people might interpret nature as God. Some people might interpret nature as the universe. I'm not entirely sure what I believe, whether I know what it is, but I just know that there is more going on in the world or in the universe than I currently understand.
Because some people also think that or believe that we also have like guides and angels
Mm-hmm.
around us.
Yeah.
Do you think that it could have been that, which is separate to like, or maybe all connected, who knows? But
Exactly. Yeah.
do you think it could have been that as well? Or
Potentially. And in all honesty, 5 years ago, if someone had mentioned, guides or spirits or angels, I would have been, oh, that's silly. But
yeah,
I think I've become much more open-minded to what is potentially possible
yeah.
and real over the last few years for sure.
And have you ever experienced anything like that since without the ayahuasca component?
No, not personally.
Okay, interesting. So that was a turning point. So the ayahuasca
Mm,
experience in 2022, quite profound.
mm.
And then what happened thereafter? Like you came back, you hopped on a plane. So how do you know when you said it lasted about 4 hours?
Yeah.
How do you know? Like, is that normal? Is that the average? Or is that just your experience? It could have lasted 10 hours for all you know.
I think that's the guidance I was given, is that expect it to take about 4 hours.
Okay.
And obviously I was flying at 10 a.m.
Mm,
from Peru back to London.
yeah.
So on the way there and before I started the experience, I basically told the guy, whatever state that I'm in, just throw me in a taxi. I need to go and pack, and I need to do this, and I need to do this. Blah, blah, blah.
Wow.
And then as soon as it came to about 2 a.m., when you feel the effects kind of like having worn off, I just felt this deep sense of peace and knowing that everything was going to work out. And I had a bed there, so I slept for a couple of hours.
Wow.
And then went back to the hotel, packed my stuff, and then came back to London.
Okay. And so then walk us through, like, on the plane, were you just sleeping or were you actually processing what had happened? And then how was it when you got back to your sort of day-to-day job?
Honestly, I felt really rested and awake, having not slept anywhere near enough compared to, normal life. So I had a stopover in Paris before eventually getting to London, and I just used that stopover to, write down everything I remembered from the experience from the start and what happened. And I think I even drew myself a little visual on
Wow.
what I wanted to remember.
Right.
So yeah, that was in 2022, but 2022 ended up being one of the craziest years of my life because I went to 16 places around the world.
For work.
Mostly for work, and then
Okay.
a friend's holiday here and there.
Right.
So I think this was the second trigger, because I basically over the course of, let's say, 3 months, I fell back into my old way of thinking, because throughout my 20s in particular, I had spent my entire life thinking about planning, prioritizing, and what progress I could make, and really just constantly looking forward and pushing and trying to think around what needed to be done and how do I go forward. And I kind of think about it like a spectrum. I finished ayahuasca like 100% in the moment. And if this was where I was in terms of full on planning and thinking about the future mode, I think I slowly deviated to somewhere right here through the year. And then, having traveled to so many places around the world, all over Europe, I was working for a big shipping logistics client at the time, doing the biggest project of my career, reporting. My work went into the board. I had a team of 10 beneath me. I think I was managing 70 process improvement individual projects around the business at one point in time. And yeah, it came to November, and I was in a hotel in Mumbai on my own, knowing I had to deliver 5 days of training that week. And I just had this whole sense of just being so burnt out and sad on how have I had this guidance from, this really profound guidance on how I should be living. And then I've ended up straight back into work mode. And I felt that, a few months on, I wasn't really living in the moment that I wanted to be. So yeah, I just felt just really sad having not really embedded all the learning throughout the course of the year.
Right.
And yeah, that was a bit of prompt for me to start therapy, because I had always considered myself a bit of a machine. And then to feel so exhausted and feel like I was slowly, breaking down, I really wanted to dive into that a little bit more. And I really wish that more people, and more men in particular, would go through therapy, because I think the right therapist can be absolutely life-changing.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've done therapy myself for years, and like on and off. And I think it's one of the best things. Like everyone should actually, I think we should have mandatory therapy for everyone, because honestly, it's the only way to like get you there and to actually start processing everything, because life is full of traumas, you know, and it's not the same for everyone. And some people's trauma, to another person is nothing, but for them, it's their experience. And yeah. And so what can you share some of the sort of struggles that you discovered that you had, even at like a high level?
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, without going into all the gory details, my parents divorced when I was 6, and it was not a happy divorce, let's say.
Oh,
So
sorry.
pretty messy. And then I
Yeah.
probably spent the next 28 years or so, knowing that my mum and dad weren't each other's biggest fan. So I think that was, I think that probably was my primary model of how I, viewed relationships. And for many years, I was absolutely terrified of the concept of divorce. So whenever I would date, go on dates, if I'd ever see something that could result in divorce, like even an initial argument, I'd be like, oh no, this is not going to work. And then boom, it would just end there.
Oh, so you would end it?
100%. Yeah.
Oh no. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Okay. I understand. I also come from a family of parents separated or legally separated.
Yeah.
And I know that because, and it's like, it's kind of now running jokes like with my husband. It's not a joke because it's not funny, but it is kind of funny now, because whenever we would have fights at the beginning, I would, which is very normal and very healthy. I would be like, okay, like we're living together, and I'd be like, okay, looks like I need to go find myself a hotel room. Like I'd be like looking up hotels, because like, and then he'd come in and I'd be like, I'm looking up hotels. I'm going to be leaving. And he was like, what? He's like, what, stop. Like, what are you doing? Like, that's not what happens. And I was like, really? Like, as in my mind, it was like, I guess it's could be over.
That's it. Yeah.
So I know, I 100% know that. And it's so crazy. And it's so, especially as you heal from the stuff and you start also becoming more self-aware. And again, this is no reflection of my mother who listens to this podcast. So I'm not trying to call her out. She was very good at modeling what a loving relationship should be. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think as a child, you always interpret things in your own way, in a very different way than even if your parents tried to model it in the best way possible. You're always going to go back to like just your own interpretation of what was said and how you interpreted it. So, okay. So that was one thing that you really went deep into. Yeah.
And hello to Mum, by the way, if she is listening.
Oh yeah. Hi, Mom. Yeah, she's definitely listening, Mom. Anyway, yeah. That's nice. The first shout out she's ever gotten. So that's nice. Anyway, and what were some other things? Was it just like the sort of family dynamic of it all, or were there other sort of personal traumas that you had to work through?
That was the main thing. And then just trying to understand, how do I almost reset my life? Because when I was a consultant for the best part of a decade, work was the absolute priority. I don't think I had any hobbies apart from seeing friends, going to the gym, and work. And work came before pretty much everything else. So I remember when I left consulting and I went to a job where I had so much more free time. In that week or 2 weeks break, I think it was between, I didn't even know what to do with myself. I was like, my laptop's gone. Okay, what do I actually do? Because
Right.
I felt if I wasn't doing something, I was wasting time and I had to be
Yeah.
constantly ticking things off a list or something like that.
Hmm.
So that was also something I had to work through, but
Yeah.
particularly
Yeah.
over the last year or so, been very lucky to find hobbies that I love and um, started improv training and done a couple of acting courses, met some amazing people, been on stage, performed twice now,
Oh,
third one coming
wow.
later in the year. Yeah,
Oh,
thank you.
congratulations. That's
Thank you.
awesome.
So yeah, I think there's been lots of things that I've thrown myself into over the past year that have given a continuation on that journey.
Yeah. And so did you also take some like so since the
Mm,
ayahuasca,
yeah.
this sort of like this element of discovering yourself, it seems like you've done
Mm,
it in various different ways. For example, with like hobbies
mm,
and also maybe what I heard also when you said like you have so much free time, you don't know what to do with
mm,
yourself.
yeah.
Sometimes it's also getting very comfortable with who you are
Mm,
alone without
yeah.
all of the noise, without all the loudness, without all the busyness. It's
Yeah.
like that is a scary thing too. And I remember in my 20s, I hated living on my own because, like, you know, I just didn't like being alone with
Mm,
my own thoughts. It was
yeah.
so scary.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was also something because then all of a sudden, all the stuff that you kind of were able to just say, I don't have time for that or whatever, it just comes. And you're
Yeah.
like, you know?
Yeah, so I'd always, I've lived in this flat here since 2015, so lived on my own
Okay.
for 90% of the time.
Hmm.
Um, and I'd always been happy to live on my own, but I always felt like I needed to be doing something.
Mm.
I find it quite difficult to just sit and be, apart from when I was meditating, because that was my focus time to do nothing. And then if I'm not meditating or sleeping, I should be doing something.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so meditation is that's an interesting thing. Is that something you were doing like a long time ago, or
Mm.
is that? Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, so I think I've done it for over 10 years or so now, primarily
Wow.
through Headspace.
Nice. Yes. Okay.
Nowhere near as consistent as I'd like to be.
Yeah.
But that started for me when I was a teacher many years ago, um, because it was super intense in my first year of teaching, not really knowing what you're doing. I think I was observed and told everything I was doing wrong every 2 weeks,
Mhm.
doing lots of admin and preparation and planning, which potentially is how it all started.
Yeah.
But I found even just the 10-day, and I'm not sponsored by Headspace, but even the 10-day free trial, I found really useful in just,
Yeah.
introducing a level of serenity into the chaos of day-to-day life.
Yeah, absolutely. That's interesting because I discovered meditation. I've shared this before on the
Mm,
podcast. Like I only discovered meditation about 3 or 4 years ago. And it was
yeah,
because my mom, who was like very adamant, because I was like spiraling a little bit at work. It was so,
yeah,
so busy, very stressful. I just qualified as a
yeah,
corporate lawyer
mhm,
and it was so intense and it was like nonstop relentless. And I was just always so stressed. And my mom was like, you need to meditate. And I actually took her, like, I finally did it. And it was life changing, like game changing. I
yeah,
recommend everyone does it. I think you have to also, I think the hard thing is like with meditation, again, for me, the quietness of it all, if you have like trauma and you have sometimes they can come out
yeah,
and it can be very overwhelming. So that's why like I think psychology, like the counseling with the meditation is ideal, especially if you realize you're meditating and all of a sudden like scary things are coming into your mind, suppressed memories, and you're like, oh my gosh. So that's always a side note. But I find like if knowing the different sorts of meditation that are out there and aligning with the best one for you. Because again, like for me, I love guided meditation, but
mhm,
some people just like it to be more quiet. And, it's very interesting what, because it's so diverse. And that's, I
yeah,
just want to kind of say that. And so, okay, so getting back to the spiritual journey, because you also
mm,
shared this beautiful story, which I love so much, about you being in Bali.
yeah,
And you saw a spiritual healer.
yeah.
And I want you to share with the listeners because it's such a beautiful story. And um, I really like it. So yeah, tell us.
Well, it all starts with a very special girl that I dated 5.5 years ago now. Had a year-long relationship. She lived with me for about 5 or 6 months. She wasn't from the UK, from Latin America. She went back to Latin America. The relationship ended after a year, and pretty much from that point onwards, she had been stuck in the back of my mind for all those years. So when I first got to Bali, I spent my first 10 days at this CrossFit retreat, and really cool, but you're in a bubble within Bali. I then went over to Ubud and stayed in this really lovely Airbnb. It's like a co-living space. Met this woman who was incredibly spiritual and took me to my first ecstatic dance class and recommended sound healing and all different kinds of stuff, which I really enjoyed. I've got my journal in front of me, and it was, I think what was it? The 12th of January this year.
Oh, this year. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there was just so many coincidences for me to go and see this particular spiritual healer guy that was really recommended. I had already messaged this guy like 2 weeks before, had no response. I went to a different gym on that day, and I bumped into someone who had just come from a session with him.
Oh, wow.
I was like, okay, but I only knew that person because I went to a different yoga place 2 days before and met her there. But I only met her because she's the auntie of somebody else I met at a co-working space. And I only went to that gym because I was moved when I was in the place before to a different living space and met someone new. And she was working out at the gym, so I went there. And just, a little bit crazy. I had just finished a workout, had jumped in the ice bath. That's just in basically flip-flops and swimming shorts. And then I basically messaged him again just on the off chance. And Ubud is not the smallest of places. I think I was half an hour away from where my Airbnb was.
Okay.
In this gym in the north. And where he was a 2-minute walk away.
Wow.
And he said, "Are you free now?"
Wow.
Yeah, and that just blew my mind.
Yeah.
So I was basically just trying to drink like a protein smoothie as quickly as I could. And I was like, okay, I'm coming.
Yeah.
So it was a really interesting experience because he absolutely made no there was nothing mentioned about money, and I thought, okay, I'm going, I should be paying something. But he said he didn't even mention donations or cost or anything. He was just a man sitting in this hut on like an elevated platform. He came and welcomed me in, and he had this like silhouette on a half piece of A4. Looked at me, held it up, and just scribbled on it. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
But it was kind of quite conversational. He basically said that, I can see you've been working in business and service. And so, well, yes, that's true. And he said, yeah, you need to do more of that. You need to be helping more businesses. The more businesses you help, the better your life will be. I'm like, cool, that sounds good. You need to balance your business energy with spiritual energy. So he particularly recommended continue meditation, do a lot more yoga, and try and find opportunities to do charity. So those are 3 things that I'm trying to do throughout my life.
Great.
And it was 3 days before this, I had tried to go on a date with this Swiss lady that I met in a yoga class. And the next day it felt wrong.
Wow.
Because I was thinking about my ex-girlfriend. And
Really?
I hadn't spoken to her for a year at that point. I didn't know what country she was in, whether she was still in her home in Latin America, whether she was in a relationship, not in a relationship, what was going on in the world. whether she would even entertain the idea of even speaking to me after that long. So anyway, this is the spiritual healer said, "Oh, there's something else you need to tell me." And I was like, "Yes, there's this girl I've been thinking about for 5 years, and I've never met anyone that even comes close. What am I supposed to do about this?" So he took another silhouette of paper and said, "Have you got a picture of it?" So, okay, yeah, here's the picture. I was like, oh yeah, she's very attractive. So he did like another scribble, and then he looked at both of them. It's like, I can see now. It's like, what? It's like, I can see that she's got these really beautiful energies. They're matched with your energies. You balance each other out. If you're ever together in the future, you're gonna have a long and beautiful relationship. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do with that, Mr. Healer Man? Am I supposed to try and reconnect, or am I supposed to move on?
Yeah.
And he said, no, you have to try and reconnect. I was like, I've not spoken to her in so long, and I don't know what she would say. And the last time I reached out, it was a year ago, and she was in a relationship. She didn't want to speak to me, and but anyway, like a day or two later, I emailed her because I didn't have a WhatsApp, Instagram, Snapchat, her LinkedIn, anything.
Right.
And then she responded within half an hour.
Wow.
And I later realized she had already drafted a note to me like a week before.
No.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And then what was the response?
She said she was open to seeing me, and I was like, cool. My holiday's over. I'm going back to. She also said that she's in Cardiff.
Yes. Which is for everyone listening.
Yeah.
We're in London right now, and Cardiff is in Wales, which is like, I don't know, an hour and a half, 2 hours away.
Exactly. Yeah. So for this, very special Latin American woman to now be, a 2-hour train ride away, just blew my mind.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
So anyway, I basically said, hey, I'm booking a flight and I'm going to come back to the UK. So I was supposed to be traveling for about 3 months. I think I did about 5 weeks.
Wow.
Flew back, reconnected, had lots of stuff to discuss, of course, over that, based on that period of time.
Yeah.
But for me, it just felt completely right. And we've since properly reconnected, and I'm seeing her again next Friday, and looking forward to it. So
amazing. Wow. And this is what I'm saying. This idea of like coincidences, but like I now understand that there are no coincidences, and things happen the way they're supposed to.
Yeah.
And perhaps that sort of gap was needed for your own growth. Like maybe you wouldn't have even, because it feels like during that period of time, that's when you kind of turned. You had the ayahuasca experience, you had some therapy. So like it feels like you've become a better potential partner for her.
Yes,
which is really nice. Really nice. And I'm sure vice versa. So wow, okay, that's really, I just love that story, because I love stories. They're so nice. So out of all of the various different modalities that you have had, over your life, in particular spiritual modalities, right? And the ones that you practice on a regular basis, which one do you think is the most profound, or has been the most profound, in terms of helping you to connect with your higher self?
Interesting. The three that stick out for me personally was ayahuasca therapy and meditation. I think ayahuasca for me was a very profound experience, and that opened my eyes to all things spiritual. Meditation I see as a bit of a maintenance activity. If you meditate every day, life is just easier. And I think I would recommend, I think everyone should try therapy. And I'm glad that many people are talking more openly about therapy, and particularly men, because I don't think, anyone who grew up in the 90s probably wasn't given the space and the encouragement to really discuss their emotions or deal with things that they might need to process in different ways. So those would be my top three. I think that have been most useful for me.
Yeah, it's great. And if we have someone who's interested and, this conversation has prompted them
Yeah.
to want to explore spirituality, different
Yeah.
modalities, how would you recommend they start?
Mm.
Do you think that in terms of maybe resources
Mm.
or podcasts or, books, is there anything that you would recommend?
So in terms of books, I'm currently reading The Power of Now, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
But a really simple step or a really simple practice is something like journaling. I think to even just be able to understand our own thoughts and what's going on. And I'd always, whenever I did journaling in the past, was always quite factual and almost like this happened today and this happened today and this is what I need to do tomorrow. But using that as a way to build awareness of our own emotions can be really powerful. So this has happened. I felt this way because of blah, 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 and just try and just let it flow as freely as possible. And then if there is stuff that's popping up that is distressing another way, think around exploring the therapy option as well, which can be really useful.
Yeah, 100%. Great advice. And how do you think I know the gentleman, the spiritual healer you talked about, he said that you should really be combining or continuing the business with the spirituality.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's a way or do you bring them in together, like in a synergy, or do you keep them separate? So in your kind of day-to-day work?
So in my day-to-day work, I would say I don't think that they're either completely separate or completely entwined. I would think about a Venn diagram with a little bit of an overlap. Because whenever you're working in business, I think having that awareness on how people feel and why that might be is really important for even just the hardcore like cost delivery or otherwise. So that's something where I see there is an overlap. I don't know. Yeah, I think there's still a lot of people who are very, very early in, let's say, their spiritual journeys, or haven't necessarily considered that side of the world. But I think having an awareness helps with our own self-awareness. And therefore, we can show greater empathy and compassion to those around us.
I like that. That's nice. So I have one question that came up, which it'd be going back to your time, like after the ayahuasca experience, you kind of come back. And I know you said that there was a period where you kind of felt over time, you just naturally started going back to like your old ways of thinking. But during that period where it was so fresh in your mind, did you come back and like share a lot of this experience with your colleagues and people who, let's say, were less spiritually inclined, or did you really try and keep that sort of sacred and separate? And the reason I ask that is because I feel like having worked in the city for several years, 5 years, and I appreciate that there is a certain way of thinking sometimes, and it's very traditional and conservative. And then all of a sudden, if you kind of come and you come in with these like kind of more wacky, like to the certain crowds, it's very crazy, it's wacky, it's out there. You have to be very confident in your sense of self in order to bring some of these ideas to certain circles.
Yeah.
Did you have that experience?
So I don't think I was bold enough to come back and walk straight to the office and be like, hey everyone, I've done ayahuasca, it's really cool, you should do it too. I think I kept that side of the 6-week journey that I had around the Americas a little bit more private. I told quite a lot of my close friends, and anyone who is going towards Latin America, Peru or otherwise, I definitely have shared the experience and shared all my notes and what the experience was like for me. I do think it's a good thing to talk about, but as you said, I think particularly in corporate spaces, the default is probably more on the conservative side.
Yeah, exactly. I think I finally, the space that I'm in now, I'm just like fully embrace all the woo. I'm like,
Yeah.
yes, people can think that I'm just so woo, whatever, even though I'm quite practical too, but I'm like, hey, this is who I am, you know? So now everyone knows me, like they all know, oh, you go to like your self-development conferences and you do. I'm that person who like on a Monday, they're like, what did everyone do? I'm like, oh, I did like a cacao ceremony this
Nice.
weekend.
Yeah, good,
Yeah. It's so
good.
funny. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's fun. I fully walked into that. Well, I think we have kind of wrapped up this idea. I think this has been such an interesting journey, and I really, really enjoyed talking about this. And thank you so much for sharing so openly about all these different amazing life experiences that have happened in the last few years. And I'm just so excited to see how things go, you know, with reconnecting with your beautiful, lady. And I just love how this sort of the healing, the spiritual healing was
Mhm.
a part of that component. I
Yeah.
think that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
So yeah. But okay, but before we go,
Yeah.
we need to do the EnvisionAir questionnaire.
Okay.
So
Okay.
are you
Ready.
ready? Are you ready?
100%
Yeah.
ready. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So, okay, this is the fun feature of the podcast. We ask guests to look back at their past, reflect on their current, present, and then also look into the future. So,
Mhm.
reflecting on your past, if you could
Mhm.
give your 15-year-old self any advice, what would it be?
Make sure that you are uh, putting time in for fun and relaxation alongside going after the goals that you want to achieve.
Mm. So you were very ambitious as a 15-year-old. You were very driven.
So yeah, I think from quite early, for some reason I was told that I was going to go to university, and um, I was naturally relatively quite academic.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of knew that I wanted to progress into something corporate wise. I think
Yeah.
I just had an idea of earning lots of money and sitting in a big office with a view,
Right.
but I didn't know exactly what that would look like.
Yeah. Good. Good advice. Looking present, if you could have
Mm.
dinner with anyone in the world tonight, who would it be?
Ooh, anyone in the world tonight? Also, yeah, one of the celebrities that I have kind of admired the most over the last few years is The Rock. So Dwayne
Yeah.
Johnson. So I really like that he has, you know, worked on lots of different areas of his life, from wrestling to films. Like he's got a drink brand, he's got a family and looks after his daughters, and obviously works
Yeah.
out a lot. So I think he just has some really interesting observations and perspectives on how do you balance the different areas of your life, and
Mm.
how do you really kind of push yourself into levels of excellence as well.
Yeah. Oh, good one. Nobody's ever said The Rock, so that's a really good one. And I agree. I think he'd be so there's a real depth to him, you
Mhm.
know, and I like seeing that from public figures. So
Yeah.
looking towards your future, what's one goal you would like to achieve in the next 5 years?
Ooh. In the next 5 years, if it's only one goal, because there's many, you know, I feel like I've got a much deeper understanding and perspective that whoever your kind of romantic partner is
Hmm.
going to influence, 90% of your happiness and sadness.
Hmm.
So my goal is for me to be the best partner that I can be,
Mm.
in support of the woman that I'm quite crazy about. So
Oh, I love that. That's so nice. Um, yeah, that's really that's good foresight that you have, and it's a very good way of thinking about it. So, well, I hope we're wishing you well
thank you.
on that journey. And before we wrap up, where can listeners connect with you if somebody wants to reach out to you in regards to like perhaps the work that you do if they have a business and they want to learn more about the consulting services that you
Yeah.
offer, or they just want to connect with you and just learn about your experience, your spiritual journey?
Yeah, of course. So LinkedIn is probably the easiest place to find me. I'm on there pretty much every day. I've also been doing this 100 coffees challenge. I think I've caught up with like 63 people so far over the last 4 months.
Wow.
So if anyone wants to have a chat or just connect with me, or if there's anyone's got any questions, then luckily I've got a very unique name. So Clarke Dodd, very easily found on Google and LinkedIn. So reach out to me
And
there.
Amazing. That's DODD. So
Exactly.
for people listening.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Clarke, for being on the podcast. It's been so great to talk. And I just want to send you lots of love and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Amazing.
We'll speak soon.
Thank you too. All the best.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to the EnvisionAir Podcast. Make sure that you like and subscribe to this podcast so that you stay up to date on all of our new episodes.